This is DW News Africa. Coming up on the program, has France's attitude towards Africa changed, or has it just changed its tune? France promises a new era of partnership, equal, modern, and free of its colonial past. We discuss what this means in reality for Africa. A shortage of free condoms threatens Kenya's progress against HIV. We hear why and what it means for the most vulnerable. And the quest to save Nigeria's wildlife and their habitats. We meet the rangers on this mission, which has seen some switch sides in the fight. I'm Tomi Oladipo. Welcome to the program. A partnership of equals. That was France's promise this week when its president met more than 30 African heads of state at a summit in Nairobi, Kenya. France has been trying to reset its relationship with Africa for years. It's withdrawn its troops from Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, not by choice. Those governments asked it to leave. But it's also tried to move on from what's being called France-Afrique, a system of influence that looked less like a partnership and more like control. But according to President Emmanuel Macron and his host, Kenya's President Ruto, it's time for a new era.
Basically, we are not wanting to provide aid. That approach has been abandoned. And besides, as you can see, many northern states are no longer providing the aid that was initially planned. Some for ideological reasons, others due to budgetary constraints. This is a reality. We can't hide behind it. Therefore, we must rethink the North-South relationship with clear-sightedness.
We are recalibrating our relationship with our partners. And we have been absolutely clear that this is a relationship of equals. At the heart of this relationship is sovereign equality. At the heart of this relationship is not extraction, is not exploitation.
Let's bring in Chris Ogumodede, visiting fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Chris, it's good to speak to you again. President Macron came to Nairobi with this pledge of 23 billion euros and the phrase partnership of equals. When you look at this, is there do you see a genuine change of orientation, or is it just simply a case of rebranding?
I see it as a case of rebranding. You know, I don't see a genuine desire by the French government and specifically President Macron to do things differently on the African continent. What I'm seeing is a country and a leader whose nation is deeply unpopular in one part of the African continent, in West Africa, where I work and live, and is simply pivoting elsewhere. Now, you might argue that what's wrong with that? That why, when you recognize, you have losses somewhere, why not pivot elsewhere? The challenge with that is that the French government and Macron specifically is trying to present its newfound, well, not so newfound in that sense, but its desire to pivot elsewhere and sort of reestablish its footing on the African continent as a new beginning. Whereas when you look at the substance and the symbolism of everything they're doing, it's, at best, it's lipstick on a pig.
And not just about Macron, but France as a whole. There seems to have been this shift in public sentiment in Africa relating to France in particular, as you mentioned, in West Africa. What's behind that?
Yeah, I've talked about this for so many years on many platforms, including this one, that, my answer is always the same. Like the substance of French policy is what's driving this, because the French policymakers, for instance, tend to believe two things. This is the Russians. This is all happening because of, Russian disinformation and what they call anti-colonial sentiment, anti-French sentiment. Sometimes they lump it into Pan-Africanism, depending on who the speaker is. But, there is the belief among French commentators, French policymakers, that this is all sort of an irrational outburst, driven by anti-colonialism and Russian disinformation. It cannot be because of the substance of French policy toward their countries, in which also includes French support for really, frankly, terrible governments that have rigged elections, that have abused human rights, have been caught up in some, terrible act of corruption. It can't be any of this. It's just the anti-colonial sentiment. It's the anti-Russian, it's the Russian propaganda and all of these things. So there is a lack of, introspection and accountability when it comes to French policy that makes me see what they're doing in in East Africa rather as, a little insincere.
Macron's been all over the continent recently. He's made lots of trips, and there's all this French investment going into Africa as well. And he, being the first French president born in the post-colonial period, has been keen to actually point that that time is past and we can start afresh, and there's also needs to be responsibility taken on by post-colonial African leaders for the state of the continent as well, not just blaming things on colonialism. What's your response to that? Because he seems to be trying to move France forward in Africa.
No one wants to move forward more than Africans ourselves. No one wants to move into more prosperity. No one wants to, get beyond the lingering effects of colonial rule, the transatlantic slave trade, military dictatorships, and all of the multitude of developments that have afflicted this continent for about 500 years thereabout. No one wants that more than Africans. No one wants to hold their leaders to account more, and we see this literally every time. So whenever I hear this rhetoric from French policymakers and others who say things like, oh, stop blaming colonialism, stop blaming the West, take accountability for your actions, hold your leaders to account. My response is, well, they do that all the time. And very often they get shot in the streets, usually by European-made weapons, Western weapons, by troops who are backed by Western governments, including France. So, you can't have it both ways. At some point, we have to be really sincere and have to be, frankly, accurate about the things we talk about. And there should be some level of introspection, even if you want to insist that a certain, part of the debate isn't, holding its own feet to the fire. I think you should be willing to do that yourself. And I've seen no evidence that the French government is willing to do that.
Is this a problem of the messenger? Macron being, for example, saying this, like you said, not many people have a problem or disagree with the sentiment. Is the issue then the messenger? And how would you say this reflects on where the Africa versus West relationship should go?
Well, I'll take the first question. It's both. It's both the message and the messenger. Regardless of who the French president is, things like France-Afrique would still be a thing. And France-Afrique, just for those who don't know, it's a system. It's a neo-colonial system of relations between France and its former colonies in Africa. That would very much still be a thing, regardless of who the president is, despite everything Macron has talked about. Oh, we're trying to move beyond that. But, when things get very hard, the French tend to default to that. So it very much will be a thing, regardless of who the president. But it's also specific to Macron himself in terms of the things he has said and done over the, almost decade that he's been the French president. So as I say, it's a bit of both the messenger and the message. As to the other part of the question, I wouldn't even frame it as Africa versus the West, because as I regularly point out on these media hits, when you look at the countries that, African nations, both individually and collectively as a continent, that they regard highly, many of them are Western. Even in West Africa, for instance, people always say things like, oh, there is anti-Western sentiment in West Africa, but time and again, surveys and, other forms of quantitative data reveal that West Africans actually have, they find other countries very popular, such as the United States, such as Germany, such as Great Britain. So it's not an anti-Western sentiment. People have a specific challenge with French policy. And I'm specific about French policy because French citizens themselves live very freely. They live very happily. They live in the best neighborhoods in West African cities. People defer to them. People treat them very well. So there is no anti-Western sentiment on the African continent in any part. What people have a challenge with is specific policies both from their own nations as well as the support they render to our government on the continent.
Very clearly put, Chris. Chris Ogunmodede, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Kenya was well on track in its fight against HIV. In 10 years, new infections dropped from over 100,000 to 16,000. But that progress now faces a new threat. More than half of the condoms distributed for free came from the US and other donors. But since Washington slashed its foreign aid, that supply has dried up. And the people bearing the cost are those who can least afford to.
In some parts of Nairobi, sex costs around $1. That's the price of 3 condoms. And that itself is a new cost for the city's sex workers, like 73-year-old Grace, as we'll call her. We've hidden her identity because sex work is criminalized in Kenya. Until last year, Grace used to get most of her condoms for free. Being HIV positive, she insists her clients use protection. She keeps her medication next to her bed as proof of her status.
I don't put them far, because other people here, they're very crazy. They don't fear. I have to tell them the truth. You can get HPV through unprotected sex. You can get HIV through unprotected sex. You can get STI, UTI through unprotected sex.
That risk is a worry for community advocates like Achibela, who supports her fellow sex workers. While just over 3% of Kenyans are living with HIV, the number is higher among female sex workers. At 30% prevalence, they're the group most at risk. Free condoms were at the heart of Kenya's HIV prevention program. But the lack of funding since the US aid cuts has crippled the work.
Before the fund cut, we had peer educators. Peer educators who were going to the hotspots, they bring for us condom. They had to record. We had dispensers. Even if you go to the toilet, you'll find a dispenser having condoms. Even here in the office, we'll just talk to a casco and bring us condoms so that the sex workers who are around can pass by and pick some.
We make one more stop at a clinic in another part of town. The staff couldn't talk to us on camera, but confirmed that since the cuts, they too had a shortage in condoms. So this is a condom dispenser, an empty condom dispenser in a clinic here in Nairobi. And the staff actually told us when they have enough condoms and they put them here, they disappear within a matter of hours. So that's how popular this program actually was. The government acknowledges the scale of the problem in the light of the public demand.
When we look at the total market need for condoms in Kenya, we require each adult man aged between 15 and 49 years requires about 40 condoms per year. Currently, we are at the rate of 20.
Samuel Kinyanjui from the NGO AIDS Healthcare Foundation, or AHF, agrees that there needs to be a rethink. But he adds that making condoms in Kenya would be too costly, and that taxes for importing condoms, even free ones, are too high.
Yes, AHF used to bring free condom for distribution. Then the donor said, we cannot be able to be giving free condoms, and also paying the taxes. The government needs to decide, because this is a social good. We cannot be taxed to deliver a social good. And I know this is the position of most other organizations which were bringing free for distribution of condoms. So the tax is the biggest barrier we have right now.
Back at her office, Achibela worries about what this means, both for sex workers and Kenyan society as a whole. She still remembers a time when HIV was rampant and there was no proper treatment.
Yeah. Me, where I'm seeing this thing is going, if I don't want to say the government, if all of us are not going to take precaution, we will go back to the 80s or 90s with HIV. Yeah.
And nobody wants that. So while the system has taken a hit, everyone I spoke to agrees that the gap in prevention must quickly be closed.
Our next guest has witnessed this change firsthand as someone who distributes free condoms and counsels people on HIV in poor areas of Nairobi. Stanley Ngara, known as the King of Condoms, is an unmissable sight on the streets of Kibera. After he lost a close friend to an HIV-related illness, Ngara started working to advocate for the importance of safe sex. But he says the cuts are stopping him from saving lives. I caught up with Stanley and asked what changes he's seen since funding cuts slashed the supply of condoms.
Wow, it is very severe to the community and to the condom users. There is a shortage of supply for free to use condom, but the community, if they have money, they can buy. But the demand is very high. We have a very high population of Gen Zs and young people coming up. Almost 70% of the sexually active Kenyans are that age of 34, 40 years and above, and below, sorry. And the demand is very high. So when you have a shortage, the shortage is serious. If I can give a very small scenario of our street sex workers, sometimes they get 10 clients in a day to make a living. And you see 10 clients in a day is 300 persons or condom to be used, and these condom have 144. So one sex worker would need 2 boxes per month, and the supply is very low. They can only get, we give them like 10 pieces in a month, and it is quite serious on the ground. There is high infection of STIs and teen pregnancy in our country. In 2025, we had more than 240,000 teeny girls who got pregnant. That is girls below 18 years. Also the gonorrhea, the super gonorrhea, there's a way the super gonorrhea was trading, and other STIs and abortions in the community. We can say 2020, there was a figure that was given, almost 700,000 abortions in a year. That is unacceptable. We need to insist on proper use of condom, and we need to give supplies.
Can you explain the challenges then of doing your work, the work of educating people on the issue since these cuts? How has that affected you?
Well, I used to survive on selling of panel model and the tools to demonstrate how to use condom dispensers. I used to go to give out condom, then I'm facilitated to go to a certain institution or company. Nowadays, I personally don't go because I don't have condoms. And if you go on the ground, the chain is too heavy. The chain of infection is wide and is getting larger every day.
Can you explain, I mean, you have touched on what is already going on, but what are your fears if this were to continue?
My fear is, if I can show you this, if this is a married person, this is Mr. John and Mrs. John. And Mr. John have decided to get a young girl, this young girl as a girlfriend, and they are not using condom. And you see, the funny thing is that this one knows this one, and this one have never told about the young girl. And the young girl have the official boyfriend who was age mate, and the official boyfriend is a benten of a elderly woman who also need fun, and the older woman, rich woman, need security, have a relationship with the police officer. If you go to the other side, the woman team up with maybe a young man in church, a choir guy, and the choir guy is a manager in one of the banks, goes with an intern student, the intern student with a boda boda with a house girl. If you see this chain, the HIV is spreading like bushfire again. STIs are spreading again. We are going back to 1980s and 90s. HIV is 40 years, and we have done a lot of work. So when the funding was removed and HIV remained, it became a very challenging thing to the whole community. So I was saying, if I can have one word with the US president, I can tell him, Let HIV go and donor go. They go together. But we cannot remain with HIV and we don't have funding to manage and even to supply condom and even educate people on prevention. That is leaving us in a very bad situation as a continent in Africa, counting that 70% of all new HIV infection and people living with HIV, they live in Africa. Where are our African people going who are sick today? The government is saying they go to hospital like any other person with malaria and other infections. But the stigma around HIV and AIDS, stigma around men having sex with men, stigma around STIs is very, very also heavy in our country. And that's what we fight. Even I'm stigmatized as a king of condom. People don't understand what business do I do? Do I promote sex? Or do I encourage people to have sex? Or do I encourage people to have safer sex? A lot of people don't understand, and that's now leave us empty as a nation and as Africa.
That's a lucid and vivid description you've given us there, Stanley Ngara, campaigner. Thank you very much for your time and for explaining this to us.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a look at efforts to save one of West Africa's remaining rainforest reserves. A group of rangers as part of an initiative to tackle the economic pressures that drive communities to exploit the forest. And for some of those on patrol, conservation is also a personal journey of redemption. As DW's West Africa correspondent Amaka Okoye reports from Okumu National Park in Nigeria.
Deep inside Nigeria's Okumu National Park, the fight to save one of West Africa's last remaining rainforest reserves is being led by unlikely guardians. Agbayibo used to be a poacher and illegal logger, but now he's become a ranger and he uses his knowledge of the forest on his patrols to protect the wildlife he once destroyed.
I was doing logging. Those logging we are doing before, we are carrying wood to Lagos, to Saple, to go or to have get money for ourselves, to flex ourselves that time. So when you came, we caught, we transferred them to the river, to Lagos. Then we used this thing, sawmill to saw them, to get some money for ourselves, our family. When I become a ranger, I know that this anything called a forest and important of wood and wildlife.
He's part of a growing ranger force recruited from within the community, working to combat deforestation, wildlife trafficking, and illegal logging.
Left wing, right, left, right.
Training for the new recruits is intense. They undergo physical drills and forest survival exercises to prepare for patrols that can last days. Precious is one of only 3 women here.
I see some farmers, loggers, poachers killing the animals, cutting the trees. So I made up my mind with my sister to become a ranger and to protect the natural resources just for future use.
The conservation effort is supported by Africa Nature Investors, which partners with the government to manage and protect the park for the next 30 years.
Communities who are forced to go into logging or poaching of animals or clearing of the forest for farmland because of poverty. And unless you address the poverty of the communities, you will never give them an incentive to help protect the forest. So to protect the forest, we employ people from the communities, and they're the ones who catch illegal poachers who are killing the animals. They catch illegal loggers who are destroying the forest, or they catch people who are cutting down the forest to establish illegal farms. And to date, we have trained 28 rangers from the local communities, but those 28 rangers were not enough.
Involving members of the community and paying them a living wage has also changed their sense of responsibility. Before, this orphaned baby elephant would probably have been killed for meat, but it was rescued and handed over to the rangers to be looked after. For Agbaibo, the poacher turned ranger, the baby elephant is more than a wild animal. For him, the animal is now deep down and personal.
When I came here, they give the elephant my name. So anytime when they call, he will come. If anywhere he is, as he hear the name Agbaibo, he will run closer to me. So I feel so very out for that aspect.
Conservationists here say protecting Okumu Forest is not just about saving trees or wildlife, it's about protecting livelihoods, combating climate change, and proving that transformation is possible both for forests and for people. For Agbaibo, every patrol is a chance at redemption, from taking from the forest to defending it.
Well, that is it for now. Be sure to check out our other stories. We've got lots on our website. It is dw.com/Africa. As well as our social media, you can see all our work behind the lots of stories we cover. I'm Tomi Oladipo from myself and the team. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.